What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So, guys, the Boars era has officially begun. Khamzat Chimaev, your new undisputed world champion and looking like a world beater doing it. In this video, we're going to break down what was the technical masterpiece that Khamzat Chimaev put on last night, as well as what might be next for the now most newly crowned champion in the UFC. So, Nick, let's get right into the conversation and start with the technical analysis, because I feel like there were so many things that happened that need to be broken down. It was a record-breaking performance, right?
Right.
Most strikes landed in UFC history, 529.
Yep.
To Dricus' 40-something. So we're talking about every one strike that Dricus landed, Khamzat landed like 11 or 12. That's an absurd differential.
Insane.
21 plus minutes of control time on the ground in a 25-minute fight. Second most in UFC history.
Yep.
12 takedowns. Now, it wasn't the takedown record. I believe George St. Pierre holds that at 17.
Yeah.
But you can only hold the takedown record if your opponent is able to keep getting back up,
Right.
and you have to keep taking them down. That was not the case last night. Khamzat Chimaev was landing his takedowns at will about 25 to 40 seconds into the round. And for all intents and purposes, Dricus was kind of staying there on the ground for the rest of the fight. One thing that really stuck out to me is his ability to transition. I don't think we've ever seen anybody in the UFC, maybe Khabib, that can transition as well as Khamzat Chimaev does. I was reading a post that Gordon Ryan put out this morning because he was very much impressed with Khamzat Chimaev's display of grappling ability last night.
Right.
And he talked about his chest-to-chest control and his chest-to-back control and how he transitions and everywhere. And Dricus even said it in the post-fight interview, everywhere I moved, he was there.
Right.
It was like he was anticipating what I was going to do. And he said he wasn't the heaviest guy I've ever felt. He wasn't the strongest guy I've ever felt. But it was like a wet blanket, constant pressure, always evolving, always moving, and making it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for Dricus to get back to his feet. What do you make of Boars' performance? Because this was one for the ages.
I loved the fight, and I also love the fact that you, me, and everybody else that was trying to predict this fight either had it going Khamzat early finish or DDP late finish or decision. Neither of those things happened. MMA math proves us wrong once again. Khamzat by decision. But in hindsight, we probably should have known that, right? Khamzat doesn't get beaten. He doesn't submit. We weren't going to see a scenario where he was going to put himself in a place to get beat like that. Dricus is tough as an old leather boot. So we didn't think he was going to be put away very easily either. We should have known this was going to be a Khamzat victory. Now, nobody could predict that he was going to break records. By the way, not just in the striking or not just in the grappling, but within both.
Yeah.
That's absolutely insane. And I know there's a little bit of an asterisk next to the striking, right? He didn't land 500 strikes on the feet like what Max Holloway does to people, right? It was crucifix and 170 strikes right to the head. And I got to give some props to the referee. You got to know that guys like that, and Dricus du Plessis, he's in a crucifix. He can't get out. Yes, it looks like a fight-ending position, but those shots weren't doing enough damage, and I'm really glad they let him fight through those positions. And look, I mean, Khamzat is the guy. He is as good as advertised, and everybody that thought he was going to go in there and Dricus was going to be a little bit too much too soon on his climb to the middleweight ranks, they just had their eyes opened up to what the highest level of MMA grappling truly is. Khamzat Chimaev is the best grappler that the UFC has ever seen. And the way he's able to make these techniques work so flawlessly is truly a thing of beauty, right? We've seen guys since the very first UFCs land double legs, land single legs, attempt wrestling of all sorts. But what we saw out of Khamzat Chimaev was nothing short of spectacular. And I got to break down that entry that he kept using. He would shoot in deep on a single leg, which caused Dricus to sprawl, which is the exact right reaction that Dricus needed.
Yeah.
However, he would ride the momentum of that leg pulling back into sprawl to almost like get to the back. And it's like a fail-proof way to get to the back on somebody. Because if you don't sprawl on that initial shot on the single, then they're going to get your single, and you give Khamzat a leg like that, he's going to get you to the ground. So you have to sprawl. And unfortunately, when you do in that scenario, because of what Khamzat's been working on, he's going to go right to your back. And even though Dricus was the bigger guy, walks around 235, everyone says, Khamzat's fought big guys and strong guys, but nobody like Dricus. I mean, he didn't even allow him to get up, right? We got to talk about that thing. George St. Pierre has the record for most takedowns because his opponent was able to get back up to his feet. I'm not trying to say Dricus looked like he wasn't trying to get back up to his feet, but after about 2 or 3 minutes of each round of control time, it kind of looked like, all right, I'm just going to make it to the end of this round, defend myself as intelligently as I can, and get back to my feet, because every round starts on the feet. That was sort of what it looked like for me from Dricus. And when I saw that in Dricus's mind and sort of his mental toughness start to fade with just the damage and all of the control that Khamzat had, I started to think, all right, if Dricus is looking at it this way, instead of let me fight like hell to get out of these positions, which is what he did in early, right? He was doing, I called it a Chinese get up without his arms and Khamzat laying across his chest.
Yeah.
So he was never going to be successful at doing that. But I liked the thought of it, right? When there's nothing else you can do, just fight. And obviously, Dricus had no answers. I mean, it was a clean sweep to the highest level, the most dominant title fight in UFC history, in my opinion. And Khamzat Chimaev comes into the middleweight division as the champion now. And in my opinion, I don't really see anybody in the 185 division that gives him as hard of a fight as Dricus du Plessis does. And that's why it feels to me like he has literally, on the same night that he won his middleweight title, has been basically shut off from the middleweight division, because when they showed Fluffy Hernandez and when they showed Kyle Baralho sitting RDR, they were all sitting cage side. Not a single one of them looked like they wanted to raise their hand to be next for that fight. It was sort of like when they panned over to Topuria with the Max Holloway thing, right? People were like, oh, Topuria looked scared. He didn't end up being very scared.
History proved that to not be true.
Right, but I could see that same look on the faces of RDR,
Fluffy, and Baralho.
Exactly. So I am almost at this point where I could be okay with seeing Khamzat Chimaev's next fight being a 205 title fight. And I know that sounds crazy. Like, Dana's specifically trying to make a thing happen now where we're not going champ and we're not abandoning divisions. We're going to defend. And then if you've proven yourself and you've truly cleared out the division, then you can move on up. But when you go through a guy like Dricus that way, a decorated champion, you go through an undefeated decorated champion like that, make it look so easy, add your name to the history books, just completely wipe the floor with him. I don't truly believe that anybody thinks there's a middleweight on the planet that could beat Khamzat Chimaev. And that's the issue with the promotion, right? How are you going to promote a fight that you know Khamzat's going to win? And that's why I feel like his next fight could and should potentially be at 205. Now, Pereira and Ankalaev have their own business to tend to, but after last night's performance, I would be shocked if Ankalaev or Alex Pereira will be able to get their hand raised over Khamzat.
Yeah, I think that if they were to make that fight, regardless of who wins, but especially if it's Pereira, that Boers would be the massive favorite.
Big trouble.
And that's coming from about the biggest Alex Pereira fan that there is in me. I love Pereira, but I'm just being realistic here. I also love Khamzat.
Right.
Here's the thing that you have to consider, because I believe that the race for Triple Champ is in full effect.
Oh, it is.
And I know people always push back on me and say, Triple Champ, Ilya, these other folks, they had to give up their belt to go to a different division.
Right.
All that really means to me is that they're not holding up a division. I respect them for that.
Yep.
What Conor was allowed to do back in the day, DC, Amanda Nunes, there wasn't like these... I guess in 155's case, there were some real compelling fights, but with DC and with Amanda, it was like, okay, are they really holding up a division, or are they just kind of, is there nobody to fight?
Yeah.
That's not really being allowed anymore. So to me, it's no sweat off Ilya's back that he's not also the 145 champion. He still would be if he hadn't given up his belt to go to 55. So when I say triple champ, I mean having been a champion in 3 different weight classes, not holding those belts simultaneously. So let me just caveat it with that. But the race for Triple Champ is absolutely in effect. Ilya has made it very clear that he wants it. He's only 1 belt away.
Yeah.
1 belt at 170 away. Ilya Topuria is your first ever 3-division world champion.
Yep.
Khamzat Chimaev has expressed interest even as recently as this week as going back down to 170 pounds and contesting for that belt. And then obviously 205 is right there. He's very big, very strong, and his style lends to him being able to fight guys that are a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger than him, as we saw with DDP last night. My biggest takeaway from last night is the the most difficult barrier for Khamzat to becoming a triple champion is the scale at 170. Because there is nobody at 170 that can beat Khamzat.
No.
And I believe the two gentlemen that are fighting for the belt at 205 right now would be pretty sizable underdogs if they were to take on Khamzat in a title fight. So the question for me really is, can he make 170 again? You know, we saw a full-framed Khamzat last night looking very good, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, because I don't believe his first his first fight after winning the belt will be in a different weight class.
Yeah.
I believe he's going to have a fight at 185. Now, you mentioned the three people that are in contention right now, and Caio Borralho, he's obviously got a tough fight ahead of him with Nasruddin Imavov. We'll see what happens with that. Likely the number one contender will come out of that. But Fluffy just fought, so timeline-wise, I think Khamzat and Fluffy match up well. Also, a lot of people believe that Fluffy possesses a difficult style for Khamzat.
Yeah.
And while that may be true, it's still a very, very unlikely scenario that Hernandez could win that fight.
Yeah.
And then the third is RDR. But RDR is a bottom kind of jiu-jitsu guy. I don't see him posing much of a threat to Khamzat. So I think it's going to be one of those three people. Nasruddin Imavov would be the oddball out if he is able to beat Caio. Paulo Costa, maybe you could throw him into the conversation, but I don't think that there's really a lot of excitement for that. So the other thing that I wanted to bring up with you is that Khamzat said he wants a quick turnaround in Abu Dhabi. You know, he seems to be wanting to go back to the Khamzat of old, the guy that would fight 2 times within 10 days. And Abu Dhabi is really interesting because Khamzat Chimaev is a headliner in Abu Dhabi,
right?
Especially now that he's the champ. You know, that's where he really cut his teeth, and we all got to know who Khamzat Chimaev is in the first place.
Fight Island
was when he fought on Fight Island. Aspinall and Gane is the main event for that fight.
Right.
You couldn't reasonably make Khamzat, now a champion, a co-main event on that fight. So what do? Do you bump Aspinall and Gane down one position to the co-main? Is it even likely at all that he fights in Abu Dhabi? I would love to see it. I know the folks over there that are the shot callers in the UAE, especially now that Khamzat represents that flag, is going to be trying to get him on that card.
Oh, yeah.
And if they're trying to get him on that card, they're trying to get him to main event it. So it's going to be really interesting to see now that he's being vocal about wanting to fight on that card. And that kind of thrusts in my final point with who the next opponent could be. Fluffy matches up perfectly timeline-wise.
Yeah.
He just fought. He didn't take much damage either.
No.
You could slide them in there, and that would be a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah, I love the Fluffy Hernandez fight, and I think stylistically he would give Khamzat the most trouble at 185, but realistically I don't think that's much of a challenge. And then when we talk about the other contenders, how about this fight for you? Dricus versus Paulo Costa.
I like that fight.
Maybe we just put that in because Paulo's trying to bring himself back down. Dricus is coming off a loss. He's going to need somebody. But I also feel bad. I'm just going to say this real quick. Dricus du Plessis was manhandled so bad in that fight that there's no scenario, whether it's a 3-fight win streak, a 4 or 5-fight win streak, where he can find himself in another title fight against Khamzat. I just don't see how anybody would be compelled for that
No
matchup.
appetite for it.
So I honestly see Dricus du Plessis, if he doesn't take a fight with one of those guys, just moving himself up as well. Now, that would be interesting because obviously we're kind of talking about Khamzat Chimaev potentially moving up. But I want to bring up something that's even a little more controversial than you said about him becoming triple champ 170, 185, 205. A lot of people look at the guys that drop weight classes as size bullies. And, you know, that's not the way we like to progress if we're going to go for champ status or potentially triple champ status. So I actually like the idea of putting him on 320. And after what he was able to do in Chicago with the social media numbers were through the roof, the attendance records, all the stuff, he broke records in the cage, outside the cage, by the numbers, analytics, every single way you can measure. Tom Aspinall versus Cyril Gane is a fight that not that many people are all that excited for. It's kind of like we were given this as a consolation prize, right? It's like you don't get John Jones and Tom Aspinall, the fight we've all wanted to see.
But you get the guy that John Jones beat in a couple of minutes.
Right. So I don't really love that. And I honestly feel like if you're going to go with my storyline, this is the perfect narrative for it. So Khamzat Chimaev, he just did the craziest thing ever. UFC 319 made Dricus du Plessis look like he didn't belong in there. If he does do that turnaround fight quickly in Abu Dhabi and fights on 320, I would assume he gets his hand raised probably pretty easily in it. And then I like to see him go to 205, but then that helps create the storyline if he does have success at 205 to move himself up to 265. put him on the same card as Tom Aspinall and Cyril Gane. Everybody knows Tom Aspinall is likely going to win that fight. And I'm not here to tell you that I think Khamzat Chimaev beats Tom Aspinall or steamrolls him or does anything like that. Like, I understand there are weight classes for a reason, and even though he looked incredible last night, Tom Aspinall is an 80-pound guy bigger than him. But I'll also say this. I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to see that fight. Khamzat Chimaev just did the unthinkable to Dricus du Plessis. Tom Aspinall has very few minutes within the UFC's cage, and even whether it's injuries or early knockouts, he just hasn't been able to get his feet wet in the cage, and that could potentially be the biggest fight the UFC can make right now if Khamzat Chimaev keeps winning, and I believe they wouldn't mind seeing Khamzat Chimaev be the first triple champion, but it's definitely a race between him and Ilia Topuria, and I feel like the race is all but started, and everybody knows that's the trajectory. And
those are the two guys.
The front runners, right? And honestly, if DDP would have won, it would have been him and Ilia, right? But I just think if he goes down to 170, obviously, if he can make the weight, that's an easy title defense grab, but I don't think he'll get as much credit for it. If he goes to 205, I think he handles Alex Pereira, and I think he could actually beat Ankalaev too, as well. That would be a tougher fight for sure, though, stylistically. But if he does those two things, who would stop him? Who would try to tell Khamzat Chimaev he can't go up there and do that? Like, again, I'm not saying he would beat Tom Aspinall, but we're getting to a point of dominance in Khamzat's career that it might have to be heavyweight that we see him fight at, and we might have to see him fight against arguably the most talented heavyweight we've ever seen in Tom Aspinall.
Yeah, and I think the timing of how Khamzat does this is really important if he is going to try for triple champion.
For sure.
Because the thing about it is, if he goes for 205, 185, and 170, right? He has to go for 170 first.
Yeah.
Because if he spends time building his frame to 205, he's going to have to shut the door on 170.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to be too big, too old. You know, he's in his early 30s now. Yeah. He's not a guy who can easily cut weight and make 170 pounds. It's been a problem for him in the past, and it was only going to continue to be a bigger problem. So if he's going to do 170, he's got to strike while the iron's hot. Yeah. But here's the really interesting thing about that. There's, in my opinion, a better than 50% chance that Islam Makhachev is your 170 champion by the end of the year. Islam Makhachev versus Khamzat Chimaev for the belt,
make a fight.
That's a big boy fight.
Oh, yeah.
That does big boy numbers.
Oh, yeah.
So I would not put it past Khamzat or the UFC brass for him to say, that's going to be the fight I'm going for next. That's going to be the belt that I want to contend for next, if he's able to steal it from Jack. If it's Jack, I mean, I guess Khamzat could pop down there. I think he could probably beat Jack pretty handedly. But then he's got to really shut the... It's a one and done at 170. He's got to get down there, do it, and then move on to 205 or 265. Heavyweight for me is a bit of a stretch. I mean, can he take Tom Aspinall down? Yeah, he probably can. Can he eat a whole hell of a lot of Tom's punches? I don't think so. And even though he, outstruck DDP by like 10x last night, he still ate 40-something shots from DDP. Yeah. Can he take 40 shots from Tom Aspinall? I just don't think so. I mean, I could be wrong. I really don't think so. But I do think that 170 and 205 are real ripe divisions for him to become champion. The biggest challenge for him, as I said earlier, is going to be the scale at 170, not necessarily the opponent.
I like that idea a lot, and I actually think the welterweight fight would be massive if Islam gets that belt. But let me just throw one weird thing out there for you. Khamzat has become quite close with Ilia. But we also know that he's been friends with Team Khabib and Islam. It doesn't seem like he's against fighting them. Khamzat Chimaev mentioned 170 last week. Ilia Topuria, last time he fought, was mentioning 170. So obviously I'm probably going way too far into the weeds, and I've gone way too deep on this. But we have two guys that are undefeated speaking about the 170 division. A lot of people think Khamzat Chimaev is going to go back down to 170. A lot of people also think Ilia Topuria is going to move up and try to steal that belt from Islam if he's able to get it from Jack. But I also think Ilia will move up to fight Jack if Islam loses. So could we be potentially seeing a world, and this sounds crazy for me to even be saying, where we see Ilia Topuria capture the 170 belt and then have to defend it against Khamzat Chimaev?
The answer is yes. The outcome is very bad for Ilia Topuria in that scenario.
Right.
And I'm an Ilia fan.
Yeah.
I think the guy's got some of the cleanest hands, if not the cleanest hands in the game right now.
Oh, yeah.
There's weight classes for a reason. Ilia Topuria is not that big of a 155 fighter. Can he go up and win the 170 belt? I put his chances at that at about 25%.
Yeah.
And Khamzat did say that he wants to go back and fight at 170. Mm-hmm. So I guess by that logic, there is a small chance that we see Khamzat Chimaev versus Ilia Topuria at some point. I think the UFC does everything in its power not to make that fight because those are your two biggest stars right now. And Khamzat Chimaev could quite literally pick Ilia Topuria up and throw him outside of the octagon.
And Ilia wouldn't argue that.
And Ilia would not argue that.
Right.
I mean, nothing on Ilia. Like, I love the guy, but let's be real here. This is a different animal that we're talking about.
Right.
And so this is the wolf versus the matador. The wolf would have that one all day long. But I guess to answer your question, is it feasible? Yes, but in my opinion, the UFC would do everything to try to prevent that from happening. And I think the only chance that Khamzat goes to 170 is to fight the winner of Jack and Islam. It's got to be something he does quick in the next 6 to 8 months. And then he's got to set his sights back on 185 and 205. But the 170 thing is just going to be kind of like a pop in and pop out. And I don't think him and Ilia's paths will cross. And thankfully for Ilia.
Yeah, I don't think they will either, but it would be interesting, right? You would, and then here's the other thing. If he decided, I'm not going to go down to fight 170 because I'm friends with Ilia and Ilia is my training partner and we're not going to go do that, then that would be either he's committing to trying to just be a champ at 205 and 185, or what I said, he's going to be the first triple champ, but he's going to have to do it 100 pounds heavier up at the heavyweight limit. That would be just interesting to me because I know Khamzat is the most fierce competitor like the UFC has, and he wants to break more records, right? He wants to become the first triple champion. If his friend's at 170, or maybe he's having a hard time making it, I don't think we should count out the fact that he could potentially go to heavyweight. But remember, I'm not predicting Khamzat to beat Tom Aspinall. I'm just saying after last night's performance, we could potentially see a path where we see that fight one day.
Maybe so.